afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and we're live at the wonderful Winter Gardens here in Sunderland for the next hour, a day ahead of the local elections. And yes, tomorrow, millions of you in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will go to the polls to vote in local elections and elections to the Northern Irish Assembly. We're in every part of the UK this hour, gauging the political bellwether ahead of those crunch elections for Labour and the Conservatives. Also coming up, we'll be talking about Beergate, Sir Keir Starmer, and those questions that remain about whether he did or didn't break lockdown rules last year. Is it just mudslinging from the Tories, or has Keir Starmer not been clear and clean with the public? And also, we'll be looking ahead to those crunch Northern Irish elections. The latest poll puts Sinn Féin 8 points ahead of the DUP, the results of which could have massive consequences for the UK and EU relationship and indeed for the future of the Stormont executive. We've got that and so much more in the next hour. As always, do get in touch, particularly if you live here in Sunderland or in the North East. Our email address is gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Don't miss it over the next hour between 3 and 4. But first, let's go back to London at the top of the hour. And here's Rosie with the news.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date with the day's news here on GB News. Boris Johnson says the country's going through a tough patch as a result of the cost of living crisis. But the Prime Minister insists the UK is better placed than it was during the economic crises of the 80s and 90s. It's as the cost of our food shop went up 3.5% last month, according to the latest figures from the British Retail Consortium.
The best future for the country is get through the tough patch that we have now, support people in any way that we can. But remember, this is we're now seeing a lot of employment and people in high-wage, high-skilled jobs. That's a much better position to be in than we were in the 1980s or 1990s.
Well, meanwhile, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has said the Conservatives have no answer to the cost of living crisis.
Everybody is talking about the fact they can't pay their bills. And what's the Prime Minister got to say about that? He was told yesterday about a pensioner who rides the buses to keep warm, and his response was to say she should be happy that she's got a bus pass. And this morning we had government ministers saying that people should not buy branded value food in order to deal with the cost of living crisis. Talk about out of touch, out of ideas and out of excuses.
Neil Parish has now formally quit as a Member of Parliament. It's after the MP for Tiverton and Honton admitted to watching pornography in the House of Commons. The Treasury has accepted his resignation. Russian businesses are being banned from using British accountants under new sanctions. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the measures are designed to cut off access to the UK service industry, which Russians heavily rely on. It's part of 63 new sanctions, which also include travel bans and asset freezes for people linked to Russian media. The European Union will stop importing Russian oil and refined products as part of a sixth sanctions package against Russia. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says crude oil supplies will be phased out in 6 months and refined products will be by the end of the year. Von der Leyen is warning it won't be easy, but it must be done.
Putin must pay a price, a high price, for his brutal aggression. Thus, the future of our European Union is also written in Ukraine. This sends another important signal to all perpetrators of the Kremlin. We know who you are. We will hold you accountable. You're not getting away with this.
Sarah Everard's murderer, Wayne Couzens, and the killer of 6-year-old Arthur Lobinho Hughes, Thomas Hughes, have appeared via video link at the Royal Courts of Justice. They're among 5 killers having their sentences reviewed today. Ex-PC Couzens was handed a whole life term for murdering Sarah Everard. Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes, who killed Arthur, were sentenced for 29 and 21 years. German investigators have found new evidence against the prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. A prosecutor told Portuguese television they're now sure the convicted sex offender, Christian Bruckner, murdered her. That is something he denies. The 3-year-old vanished during a family holiday in Praia de Luz in 2007. Trade unions are warning cuts to rail funding will endanger passengers and increase the risk of serious train crashes. The TUC claims Network Rail plans to reduce its annual spending by £100 million, mainly by losing 2,500 maintenance jobs. The union believes safety-critical jobs will be cut. The Department of Transport, though, says safety will always be the main priority of the Network Rail. The Transport Secretary says the announcement of the opening of London's new railway, the Elizabeth Line, a day before local elections, is a breach of electoral rules. Grant Shapps has referred the case for investigation by the Electoral Commission. The new line will open on the 24th of May. London Mayor Sadiq Khan says he's really excited.
Trains are brand new. The stations are step-free. It will give not just London's economy, but our country's economy a massive economic boost. We think it will contribute more than £42 billion towards the national economy. Really important in this difficult time after the last 2 years.
The Met Office says Britain could face a heat wave from around mid-May as temperatures will start to climb from this weekend. The weather, they say, could get very warm later this month, peaking at around 23 Celsius in the south of England. Last month in April, average maximum temperatures were above normal. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. It is coming up to 8 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your wireless radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. We're live in Sunderland for the next hour, a day before millions of voters across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland go to the polls. Not all council seats are up for grabs in England. Just like here in Sunderland, a third of the council seats are up for grabs, but all council seats are up for contention in Scotland and Wales. And of course there are those crucial Northern Ireland elections taking place to the Stormont Assembly on Thursday as well. We're going to be in every part of our United Kingdom in the next hour, in the south, the north, in Scotland, Wales and indeed in Northern Ireland too. But we're going to begin with the two main political leaders today, because unsurprisingly they've been out on the campaign trail trying to drum up support for the respective parties. First of all, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been at Eastleigh in Hampshire talking to voters there, and this is what he had to say to the press when he spoke a little bit earlier on today.
Tomorrow is a very big day, and the point I would make to everybody wondering what to do is if you want to help with your family budgets and you want to make sure that you've got more at the end of the month, then make sure that you vote Conservative, because when you look at the council taxes, the efficiency of Conservative councillors versus Labour councillors, it's Labour councillors that go bankrupt, it's Conservative councillors that deliver better value for money, and Conservative councillors have the lowest council taxes in the country. So bins collected, potholes filled in, better value for money.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has also been out on the campaign trail today, trying to insist that people out there, you and I, should vote for his party tomorrow, not least of all because he argues that on the big issue of the cost of living crisis, the Conservatives are not getting it right. Here he is, Sir Keir Starmer, speaking in Wakefield, again, in the last couple of hours.
Well, here in Yorkshire we're fighting for every vote, and I know we've got to earn every vote. I'm really pleased that we've got a brilliant set of candidates, we've got a positive message, and we have been laser-like in our focus on the cost of living crisis, because wherever you go, people come up particularly to me and say, look, I can't pay my bills, Keir. And I've been able to say we would have a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies in the North Sea. We'd use that to help with energy bills. So very positive case, but we've got to earn every vote, taking nothing for granted. We want to hold what we've got and take gains where we can.
The two main political leaders out and about today. We are in Sunderland. I must have said the weather seems to change every 5 minutes, but a very good welcome from the people here at Sunderland to GB News this afternoon. This is, of course, a council that has been run by the Labour Party for a very, very, very long period of time, but there are questions about whether Labour will still be the largest party in terms of controlling the council from tomorrow onwards. I'm absolutely delighted to say, joining me in person here in Sunderland is our North East reporter Rachel Sweeney. Rachel, good afternoon to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We are in Sunderland today. Kind of give us a sense of why we're here. What's the politics of this part of the world like?
Well, all eyes are on Sunderland, as it always is. Sunderland's pretty much an indicator politically after it gave the indication for Brexit in that vote in 2016. A lot of people here are very politically engaged and have been since then. So all eyes are on us. Now, especially Washington South, where the leader of the Sunderland City Council, that's his constituency now, one seat was already lost to the Tories. It's very worrying for him, especially at the moment with Partygate going on and with everything that's happening in London, or how is the national picture going to affect people up here. Now, the thing that people are speaking about the most, I would say, in Sunderland is this issue of its spending, isn't it? It always comes down to money. Who's got the money, who's spending it, and how's it going to affect Joe Bloggs on the street? Now, the City Hall headquarters on the banks of the River Wear are costing £2.4 million a year. Now, that is double what is currently being spent on sports and leisure. Now, that's irking a lot of people. Obviously, it's a very bitter pill to swallow for people who are struggling with the cost of living. You know, the living standards have dropped the lowest since the mid-1950s. So it's difficult for people to appreciate how you can justify spending that much on an office space. Similarly, although we've seen investment in hotels and in office spaces, it's been difficult to accept for some people the investment that's gone into the arts, for example.
And it's fair to say that, of course, this has been a real Labour bastion, hasn't it? Really since the foundation of the council. But in recent years, support has shifted to the Conservative Party. Why do you think that is?
I think it's been such a Labour stronghold, but it has weakened, I would say, over the years. As more people become politically engaged, they're more interested in what's happening in London, how that's affecting the bigger picture. I would say that if in terms of turnout, the turnout has doubled in Sunderland from 2015 to 2019.
So people really are more politically engaged?
People are interested. I mean, if you think about Nissan is the biggest employer here. People are affected by what happens economically, about investments in the manufacturing sector especially. That's, you know, that's thousands and thousands of families and with bills and with interests in what's happening economically. So anything that happens, decisions that are made in Westminster affect people up here greatly, and they're very aware of that.
They are, but at the same time we have got a cost of living crisis, haven't we? And we know, you know, this is a socially deprived part, in large part of the country. It must be hitting people hard, the rising cost of fuel, the rising cost of foods.
I've been reporting extensively on GB News from many areas in the North East of England about the heating or eating issue, about what people need in terms of a break when it comes to trying to pay their bills, put food on the table, support their families. So, like I say, I think what people in Sunderland especially are going to be watching out for where the money's going to be spent, and I think that's why we've seen Keir Starmer up here recently. He's trying to reinforce the fact that it's a Labour stronghold. This is your history, this is your heritage, but people here are very aware politically, so they know what else is on offer. They're open-minded and they're waiting to see what's best for them, what's going to suit their family.
Indeed. I'm just very finally, Rachel, you know, this is kind of part of the Red Wall, the so-called Red Wall, that lots of people, as you say, came out and voted Conservative last election, which hadn't ever been. Is the support for the Conservatives still there, do you reckon, particularly for Boris Johnson?
I think since Partygate, it's dwindled. It's been very difficult. You know, people are always saying on social media how they attended funerals on Zoom. It's really hard to think about those traumatic memories for families, and then see pictures of people in Westminster Party and the people who paved those rules.
So you think it might have a bit of an impact then?
I think it will have an impact, but I think there'll be a higher turnout than average in Sunderland. People who are engaged, they're proactive with what they want. So it could go either way. If they lose 6 seats this time round, they'll lose the hold.
Indeed, yeah, Labour will lose control of the council. Rachel, really good to see you.
And
Thank you so much indeed for joining us, Rachel Sweeney here live in Sunderland. And of course, we're going to have full coverage of the elections here on GB News on Friday. A special programme, Vote 2022, will be on air from 10 a.m. through today, bringing you the latest results. And we'll be returning to this a little later on in the programme. We'll be talking about the situation in Wales, in the rest of England, in Scotland and, of course, in Northern Ireland. But let's move on for the time being, because we'll talk about grammar schools now, because Boris Johnson's been urged to bring back, essentially, grammar schools under a new campaign by a Conservative MP to help level the country up. That MP is Jonathan Gullis, and I'm delighted to say he joined us down the line this afternoon. Jonathan, very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us here on GB News. How is bringing back grammar schools going to help level up the country?
Well, the problem at the moment, Darren, is that over 50% of the 163 grammar schools are situated in 11 local education authority areas out of 150, basically London and the South East. What grammar schools do is improve social mobility, allow those kids who we know can go on to achieve great things, get the results that they should be getting, and bring choice back into our education system. And you've just been there, as you are in Sunderland. Well, in the North East region, there's not a single grammar school. So how is it fair that a kid in Kent, a kid in Stratford-upon-Avon has that option, but a kid in Teesside and Stoke-on-Trent doesn't?
In saying this, I think overall it's the Conservative Party, hasn't it, that has got rid of more grammar schools over the last 3 or 4 decades than there has been Labour. Do you think there's been a problem within the Conservative Party?
I think that the Conservative Party have focused on the academisation, which has, I think, a very successful overall effect. And looking at multi-academy trusts and the fact that the government have now given special protection to grammar schools as part of the long-term academisation of the education system proves that they believe they work. The Secretary of State for Education's praised them. He's got 3 in his own patch. I grew up there in Stratford-upon-Avon. My brother actually attended one of those. My mum's the beneficiary of a grammar school as well. And I just think it comes down to that simple idea of choice. And the idea that a kid in Stoke-on-Trent, a kid in Teesside should have the same choice, the same access to opportunities as a kid in Kent does. And if we get that right, and I think Captain Hindsight himself was the beneficiary of a grammar school education. So if it's good for some, it's good for all as far as I'm concerned.
Well, so, I mean, I've got a personal skin in the game here in the sense that I'm from Northern Ireland, which has obviously got a grammar school system. I went to both a comprehensive and to a grammar school. And it is interesting, Northern Ireland, in this, in that you're right in saying it does help some, in that Northern Ireland students attain higher A levels on average than the rest of the UK, which is great news, and that is undoubtedly because of the grammar school system. But Jonathan, Northern Ireland also has the highest number of people who leave school without any qualifications, and that's the concern, isn't it, that grammar schools really divide people up, and a lot of people are left behind. So rather than levelling up, which it does for some, for others it can very easily level down, that at a very young age, at the age of 11, you're told you're just not as academically gifted as others.
I think you're right to point out some of the flaws in the current system. I don't agree with just 11 plus. I think we should have multiple entry points, both at 11 plus, 13 plus and 16 plus. I think that what we should be doing is starting by putting grammar schools in those education improvement areas, those 55 the government identified themselves as being educational black holes. And if we get those right and we put them in those areas and we show what they can be what they can do in those local areas where there are higher levels of deprivation, helping those kids on some of the council estates that I'm proud to serve, whether that be Torpits, Norton-on-Moors or beyond, then ultimately we can make sure we show the benefits of a grammar school system and how it can work in the interests of those people it's meant to be helping, those students from deprived backgrounds.
OK, and just very finally, Jonathan, while we've got you, just on the cost of living, clearly it is a big campaign issue this week. The Prime Minister's been interviewed, obviously, on ITV about it. I mean, is it your sense, and I'm sure you've been out campaigning, that the government needs to now do more, and not more in 6 months' time, but more pretty imminently to help people out in the months ahead?
Well, look, Darren, I'm out and about right now, so I'm leaning the phone against a fence as we speak. I've been out and about across Kidsgrove, Talk, Butt Lane, New Chapel and Malcott, where I've got elections for Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough, a council that's never been Conservative since it was first created in an election. So this is a huge moment. We're targeting all these wards. We're going after Labour in their safest wards because we have a positive local message about what we're doing with a £17.6 million deal. But you're right to say that cost of living has, of course, come up on doorsteps and people are worried and concerned, but people also understand this is a global problem. This is not unique to the United Kingdom, and that they do understand the government has obviously brought in lots of different schemes, whether that be the £150 rebate, which has gone out to my local area, £200 on the energy bills later in the year, the warm homes discount, the winter fuel payment increases, and the home support fund now worth £1 billion. But of course, I think there will need to be some more done down the road, and I think the Prime Minister's made it clear that more is being looked at, but we have to make sure that we don't just awash the system with cash, because if you look at America, they did that and inflation went up. So we don't want to create and do things that will create even more inflation, which will only prolong this issue further into 2023. What we want to do is support people now, but make sure that we can get inflation back under control and our economy booming.
OK, Jonathan, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Jonathan Gullis there, the Stoke-on-Trent Conservative MP, joining us. Thank you very much, Jonathan. It is, 21 minutes past 3 o'clock. You're watching GB News. Let's go back now to the local elections. Elections, of course, local elections in Wales too. And our reporter, Bradley Harris, has been in Monmouthshire finding out what the mood is like there. What is the political temperature? Who is likely to do well tomorrow?
It was 5 years ago when the Conservatives took majority control of Monmouthshire. Now they're promising to tackle bread and butter issues, such as fixing streetlights, pavements and putting potholes right as part of their latest local election campaign. But are these the issues voters here in Monmouthshire want to prioritise?
Plan of infrastructure for parking so people can park easier, for more tourism for buses to come into town. Help support the shops, local businesses, and stop them from closing down, really, because they're not getting the customers into the shops.
I'm thinking more of the economy and the way people are struggling with household bills at the moment, but also the health system. You know, the health system is creaking after COVID particularly, so we need more money pushed into certainly health and the economy generally to help people with things like food banks and so on.
Potholes, the Wye Bridge is atrocious. It's like a third world country road. Parking in the town isn't great anymore because there's no room, and taking your kids to school or school times is just chaos, absolute chaos.
Whatever the issues are, can voters here separate local party promises with the much bigger political stories across the UK? Boris Johnson's handling of the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine and the continuing developments over Westminster parties held during COVID restrictions could be crucial as we step closer to May the 5th. Kate Watts runs a cafe in Monmouth. She's noticed her high street change over many years and wants to see consistency from the council.
Thanks, bye. I think there's lots of things that have been happening that, you know, could change your mind, but for me personally, no. I think it's about consistency, making sure we've got the same leader at this time. I don't think we should be changing drastically. Obviously, things like Ukraine, cost of living is really important. It's been really, really difficult over the past 5 years, so any government that was in power really would have had a difficult time. And I think it's been handled as best as it really could. Who knows, you know, if it would have been different with somebody else in power. So for me, yeah, I'm quite happy with how it's been handled.
Across Mono Bridge, others are looking for a change from a Tory majority.
Or if they got back in Monmouth, I think that would be a real retrograde step. It would be just more of the same, of the same, of the same. Not any positive aspects to them, really.
As they look to build on the gains they made 5 years ago, the Welsh Conservatives are well aware that many voters will be basing their decision on wider issues, including lockdown parties in Downing Street and the cost of living crisis. We'll get a better idea of how true that is at the polls tomorrow. Bradley Harris, GB News, Monmouthshire.
There we go, that's the picture in Wales the day before voters there go to the polls. You're watching GB News, we're live in Sunderland. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet me at GB News, particularly if you live in the northeast of England this afternoon. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, what do the polls suggest will happen tomorrow? Could the Conservatives lose hundreds and hundreds of seats? How many will Labour gain? We'll be talking about that in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
28 minutes past 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. We're on TV, on radio, and on your online devices, gadgets, whatever they are. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We're also live in Sunderland this afternoon because it is a day before the local elections. What's the poll suggesting? Let's speak to Chris Curtis. He's head of political polling at Opinium and joins us down the line now from London. Chris, very good afternoon to you. Local elections are always quite difficult to gauge, aren't they? Because ultimately, not everyone's going to vote tomorrow, particularly in England. And it's not like a national election in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. There's a big unknown question about tomorrow, which is how many Conservative voters, many of which are pretty upset with the government right now, are going to bother walking down to their polling station and casting their vote for Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. And I, as a pollster, actually really struggle to answer that question, which does make these set of elections, particularly in England, a pretty hard one to predict. Having said that, we do know from the national polls that there's lots for the Conservatives to worry about. There's lots of voters who are moving away from the party. There's lots of voters, as I say, who now disapprove of the job Boris Johnson's doing as Prime Minister, whether that's because of Partygate or whether that's because of the cost of living crisis. On the other hand, we also have to remember that this is a pretty good set, that the Conservatives don't have very many seats to lose here. So it's very hard to end up with a negative headline result at the end of it. That's because most of these seats are being fought in places where the Conservatives did pretty poorly last time round in 2018. So there isn't that much for them to lose, but I think it's going to be a difficult night for them nonetheless.
A difficult night indeed, but the range of potential seats that we keep hearing the Conservatives could lose ranges, I think, from 200 potentially up to 800. Is it in the end, Chris, that actually we shouldn't look at the kind of the seats that are won and lost, but rather the national share of the votes?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, to be honest with you, we do have to remember that opinion polls, while not perfect, are still going to give us a better indication of where that national picture is than the set of local elections that we get tomorrow. And that's because national opinion polls speak to all voters. They don't just speak to them in a selection of seats that happen to have elections up. And they also, they don't just speak to those who go out and vote in local elections. Lots of people vote in that don't vote in local elections but vote in general elections, and in opinion polls we speak to those as well. They're not going to count in the final results tomorrow, so it's always better to listen to those national opinion polls to get the national mood than it is these local election results. But these local election results are still going to be indicative, and the thing in particular I'll be looking at is not just that national vote share, which is still going to be a lot more important than seats up or seats down, but also the vote share in some of those marginal seats that are going to decide the next election. Is Labour starting to win the popular vote again in many of those red wall seats they lost? Is Labour or even the Lib Dems starting to do well in some of those so-called blue wall seats that have traditionally been Conservative across the south of England, but now the Conservatives are struggling to hold on to them? How's that picture falling out? That's going to be the big thing that I look for as we get these results in over the coming days.
And just very quickly, Chris, and it is interesting, isn't it, that Keir Starmer spent the day before campaigning in Wakefield, a seat Labour essentially need to reclaim back, potentially, in a by-election relatively soon, and the Prime Minister is in Eastleigh in Hampshire, where the Lib Dems used to hold that seat. That's a sign of where they think the real problems potentially might be for their respective parties tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. I mean, I think that Wakefield is one of those areas that we're particularly going to be looking at with the results tomorrow. If anything, actually, it's probably the place that I'm going to be watching closest, not just because of the results tell us anything about the next general election, but because there is this by-election coming up. It is going to be a crucial by-election for Keir Starmer. I think his leadership's going to be in real difficulty if he doesn't win it, so he's going to have to deliver a good result there. And these set of local elections are going to be the first indication to us of what might happen in that by-election.
OK, fascinating stuff. We'll get more from you when the polls close, Chris. As always, thank you very much indeed. Chris Curtis there, the head of political polling at Opinion. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we're going to be in Scotland, Northern Ireland, also talking about Keir Starmer and Beergate. Is it mudslinging, or has the leader of the opposition not been terribly clear on what happened on that particular night? But before all of that, just after 3:30, here's Rosie again with the news.
It is 3:33. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Boris Johnson says the country's going through a tough patch as a result of the cost of living crisis. But the Prime Minister insists the UK is better placed than it was during the economic crises of the 80s and the 90s. It says the cost of our food shop went up 3.5% last month, according to latest figures from the British Retail Consortium. Russian businesses are being banned from using British accountants under new sanctions. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the measures are designed to cut off access to the UK service industry, which Russians heavily rely on. It's part of 63 new sanctions, which include travel bans and asset freezes for people linked to Russian media. The sentences of 5 killers are today being reviewed at the Royal Courts of Justice. The murderer of Sarah Everard, Wayne Couzens, is among those having their sentences examined. Our London reporter Alice Porter is outside the court now. Alice, just bring us up to speed with the latest.
Well, Sarah Everard's parents attended the Court of Appeal today as Wayne Couzens' lawyers argued that the whole life order that he received should be reduced on the basis that he had showed genuine remorse. That balanced out the breach of trust. But the prosecution said that while a whole life order given to somebody who had killed just one person was highly unusual, they argued that the abduction, the sexual motivation and, crucially, the fact that he committed this crime while acting as a police officer for the Metropolitan Police Service meant that this was it stood by the judgment from the original judge, who said he should have a whole life order and therefore should not be released from prison. The judges will hand down the judgment from Wayne Couzens and the 4 other people's sentences that are being reviewed today in the next few weeks.
Alice, thank you very much. You are now up to date here on GB News, but on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Now let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to GB News. It is almost 22 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. We're at the Winter Gardens here in wonderful Sunderland on this Wednesday afternoon on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Do get in touch, by the way, gbviews@gbnews.uk. How are you going to vote tomorrow? Are you going to vote at all? You can also tweet me at GB News. Let's turn our attention now to Scotland, because there's a new poll out today suggesting that the Conservative Party has fallen behind Labour when it comes to these local elections tomorrow, heaping more misery on the Prime Minister north of the border. The SNP, though, remain in the lead. Let's speak to journalist Dan McCaffrey, who is joining us down the line from Scotland this afternoon. Dan, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Let's first focus on the Conservative Party. Clearly they did very well in recent elections, portraying themselves as the unionist party against the SNP. Are Labour now getting their act together, do you reckon? Or is this a reflection of what's been happening at Westminster?
I suspect there's a little bit of both to that. I suspect that for the most part it's a reaction to what's happening at Westminster. But it should be pointed out that we saw polls just like this a year ago at the Scottish parliamentary elections, and the commentariat were in a wild frenzy about Labour overtaking the Conservatives. And what actually happened in practice was that the Conservatives held their 31 seats in the Scottish Parliament. They gained an additional 100,000 votes in the regional list, and Labour suffered their worst vote in Scotland since devolution began, and that was despite leading the Conservatives in most opinion polls in the run-up to that election. So I think these polls should be taken with a pinch of salt. The local elections obviously are slightly different in Scotland because we run a single transferable vote system, and obviously all parties will be going for those first preference votes, but it's also how those transfers work out. Historically, the Conservatives haven't always benefited from transfers, so they'll be looking to get as many first preference votes as possible. But I think it'll be quite tight between the Conservatives and Labour for that second place. Of course, in the last local elections, the Conservatives only beat Labour by about 14 seats or so. So it might not be a huge shock if Labour overtook the Conservatives in the numbers of seats, but depending on how the first preference votes work out, that could be quite interesting.
Yeah, indeed. But is there a sense of these local elections, Dan, unlike, I suppose, in the national elections? Because it feels in the national elections that increasingly Scottish politics has come down to whether you're a unionist or not. In the local elections in Scotland, is that a big factor, or is it frankly still on local issues?
Look, I think there's a bit of both. I think that the unionist versus independence or nationalist argument is still very valid in Scottish politics. I think the old politics of left and right has disappeared from Scotland for some time, and I don't see that going away at this election. Local factors will undoubtedly play a role in certain areas. Like Glasgow's a good example, where the unionist parties have seen a benefit or a boost in their support because of the litter crisis that the SNP presided over. Similarly, there'll be other issues in other local authorities which will no doubt have an impact on the way people vote, but I suspect national issues, particularly this issue of whether or not there'll be another referendum next year, which the SNP have promised, and the Conservatives have come out very strongly against, whether that has a role to play. I suspect it might still have a role to play.
We should give some credit, though, to the SNP, shouldn't we, in the sense that, I mean, I can't remember the last time the SNP weren't ahead in a poll in Scotland. Normally, when you've been in power for years and years and years, you get a kicking, and you expect at least one party or another to do particularly well. But yet the SNP, and you've talked about the scandals as well in recent months, there's still, their vote endures to a large degree.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens in May. I mean, I suspect the SNP will still win this election, although it will be interesting to see how these scandals do pan out, if they have any effect at all. I mean, we've also seen a lot of stuff in the news recently about the ferry scandal. There's been a lot in the Scottish news recently. It's whether or not it has cut through to voters. I think it will matter
Let's
more,
go to Will Hollis's package first, just to break it up a little bit.
So the one interesting thing about the SNP and their vote at these local elections, I think, will be the impact of the Green Party on their vote, because at the last Scottish elections the Greens saw a boost, and I think that a lot of SNP voters know, or are savvy enough to know, that they don't just need to put all their eggs in one basket with the SNP, that there are other pro-independence options, and of course that's beneficial for the Greens. It might be beneficial for Alex Salmond's Alba party, but it will be interesting to see if that has any impact on the number of seats that the SNP do win.
And just very finally and quickly, Dan, if you can, there's a sense here in England that actually the winner tomorrow might be voter apathy. People simply just will not turn out to vote. Is that the view in Scotland?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, you know, as somebody who's been involved in party politics for some time, this seems to be one of the most kind of apathetic elections that I've seen for a while. It's certainly an election that I've not seen, I mean, certainly as many SNP activists out as I have in the past. I think there's a general apathy. I think actually the enthusiasm comes from the smaller parties, the insurgent parties, who are trying to make some gains at these local elections and see these elections as an opportunity to break in to the Scottish political scene in a much bigger way. But certainly from the mainstream parties, particularly the SNP, it has to be said, who normally you would see droves of their activists out at election time, it seems to be very, very subdued from them. And I suspect that is probably a wider reflection of voter apathy, but we'll see what happens on Friday when polls are counted in Scotland.
Indeed we will. Dan, really appreciate your analysis this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Dan McCaffrey, who is from the Scottish Daily Express. Thank you, Dan. OK, we have been to Scotland, we've been to Wales, we're going to go to Northern Ireland in a second. We've been to the south of England, I'm in the northeast. Let's go to the heart, though, of England, to Derbyshire this afternoon. Our reporter Will Hollis has been out and about trying to gauge the views from you, the voters, about what is likely to influence your vote tomorrow, if you're going to bother to vote at all.
Done a postal vote, and I voted Green for this because they do a lot in Duffield Green. They've done a lot of things, you know, that are suitable for older people.
We think that probably Labour's the only people that just generally are the big people to go against the Tories. But Green is definitely something that we think is more the way to go. But it's whether generally we're always thinking, do we tactically vote or do we vote with what we really believe.
I still think, despite all the stories that's been going on about Boris and everything, I still think he's done an amazing job for us. He's had to deal with everything that's gone off through COVID and then the Ukraine war and everything, and I think he's been there for us all the way through and through. Yes, he's made mistakes, but I think any party in that position would have made mistakes. So, and as far as local councils go, again, I don't see any issues with it. I'm happy with the decisions they've made for us.
I think I'm going to go for the Green Party this time. Mainly because I've had enough of Labour and the Conservatives. I think they just all chat rubbish, don't they? I've had enough of them.
The way I see it, even if Labour were in charge, I don't know if they would have done any better than the Conservatives anyway.
No, I'm not planning on voting at all. I don't think it really matters at this minute in time who we vote for, who's in power. We're still going to be in the same position either way.
Because I've been a lifelong Conservative voter. In fact, I even stood for to be the MP of an area not so far around here. Came second, I didn't get it, but I think they've completely lost the plot, to be honest. Absolutely lost the plot. So they won't be getting my vote this time around.
I'm trying to vote the best vote for Belper, but you know what? I also want to give the major parties a good spanking. I like generally the Green ideas, but I don't like the woke aspect of the Green Party. In some ways, it seems to me the woke side of the Labour Party under a new name. I like the Labour Party's social policies, but I don't like their wokeness. I like the Tory Party's anti-wokeness, if you like.
If something big is happening locally, then you've got a chance to do something about it. But if you look at Amber Valley and it's, Conservative, Labour, etc., it doesn't matter who's in, we're more or less doing the same thing.
There we go, that was the view from Derbyshire. Now, let's turn to Beergate, as it's been branded. Yes, those questions about Keir Starmer, what precisely went on at a campaign meeting last year. He was, of course, caught drinking beer, apparently ordered 200 quid's worth of curry. He says it was all within the rules because it was related to work. The Tories and others accusing them, though, of breaking the rules, and that Durham police need to reinvestigate what happened. He's been answering questions, the Labour leader, about this very issue earlier on today.
I've not had contact from Durham police, and I think people are just about fed up with the mudslinging that's going on. We know there's elections coming, we know what the Conservatives are up to. What we need to do, I think, is to focus on the issue in hand, which is the cost of living, because as we go across the region, we go across the country, talking to people on their doorsteps, everybody is talking about the fact they can't pay their bills. And what's the Prime Minister got to say about that? He was told yesterday about a pensioner who rides the buses to keep warm, and his response was to say she should be happy that she's got a bus pass. And this morning we had government ministers saying that people should not buy branded value food in order to deal with the cost of living crisis. Talk about out of touch, out of ideas and out of excuses.
There you go, that was Keir Starmer speaking earlier. Richard Holden is a Conservative MP and joins us down the line. Richard, very good afternoon. To you, we've heard it there from the horse's mouth, haven't we? The police haven't been in touch with Keir Starmer again. He was exonerated last year. We trust our police forces. Surely that must be the end of the matter.
Well, I think so much evidence has come to light since those investigations last year. Labour were saying at the time that Angela Rayner wasn't there. We now know she was there. We don't know how many staff were there. There's so many unanswered questions from the Labour Party that we just need now for them to come clean. And I think, I'm afraid, a new police investigation needs to happen. So much evidence has come forwards, and it's turned out that the police haven't actually interviewed the people who were there and did that video of Keir Starmer through the window. So I think there's some real unanswered questions here from the Labour Party, and I've still not heard a single Labour politician able to explain to me what the difference is between what the Prime Minister has been fined for and what Keir Starmer hasn't been fined for. It has to be one rule for the Prime Minister and one rule for the man who wants to be the Prime Minister.
Well, many people will point out, though, that, of course, even though this may well be the same law, these are very different events. The police have investigated it, and, when I was interviewing Conservative MPs a couple of months ago, they were like, well, these things don't really matter. There's a war on. We should be focusing on the cost of living crisis. We should be talking about what's happening in Ukraine. We shouldn't be talking about a couple of beers and a bit of curry.
Well, that's exactly what I've been doing in my constituency all the way through this for the last 4 months. But all the Labour Party have done is bang on and bang on about this. And it's about time that they were held to the same standards as they seek to hold others to. That's all I'm asking for. I was out campaigning with my friend James Daly up in Bury yesterday. And the Labour Party campaign literature on the doorstep, the first paragraph was all about this Partygate subject. It's something that they're campaigning hard on, and I just think that they need to be held to the same level of accountability on it as they have sought to hold the Prime Minister to over the last 4 months. I cannot understand the difference between what the Prime Minister has been accused of and what Keir Starmer seems to have been doing. I just think that they need to be held to the same standard.
So, yeah, but Richard, well, we'll see. The point is the Prime Minister hasn't been accused of it, he's been found guilty of it and been fined over it. And isn't the difference, though, in a sense that even if Keir Starmer has been fined for broken the rules, the questions are that the Prime Minister, A, invented these rules, B, potentially broke them not just once but multiple times, and C, allowed a culture in Downing Street where the rules were broken even more than a couple of times, potentially dozens of times. So there is a big, big difference, isn't there?
Well, I think that the difference between the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer actually was that Keir Starmer wanted to go further than the rules that we implemented, and he wanted them to stay in place for even longer than the government pushed for. So actually, if you're going to say about differences, then that's one big difference. Another big difference is that the Prime Minister was working in Downing Street, in his home, and Keir Starmer was somewhere hundreds of miles away across the country. You can't say it was his normal workplace. So there are some differences, but I'm afraid that they really come down against Keir Starmer and his what he's saying, and not in his favour on this matter. And the truth is that we just don't know at the moment exactly what's been happening with Keir Starmer, because his story changes from day to day, which leaves so many questions unanswered. We don't know who was there. You know, there's talk of pizza as well as curry, as well as all these beers. We just have so few answers from Starmer, and whenever he says something, the story and the narrative changes. And as an experienced QC, he knows very well that when you're changing the story, then you're not a very good witness. And I think that questions really need to be answered.
OK, Richard, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed.
On Partygate. Voters will decide tomorrow, of course. Thank you, Richard. OK, we've in many ways saved the best to last, I would argue, in terms of our guest and our subject matter. It is, of course, those crunch elections in Northern Ireland, the Assembly tomorrow. Probably the most important elections actually taking place tomorrow, could decide on the UK's relationship with the EU. Arlene Foster, former First Minister of Northern Ireland, and, of course, GB News presenter, joins us now from the mighty Northern Ireland. Arlene, thank you very much indeed. As I say, the best to last. Let's talk about this. There was a big debate last night, wasn't there, between the party leaders. What was your sense of how things came out in the wash?
Well, I don't think there was any surprises. Each of the party leaders put forward what they believe is their stance at this moment in time. Of course, we're in the very last throes of this election campaign. Most people are winding up their campaign now, and now it's over to the voters. And of course, as you know as well as I do, turnout in Northern Ireland is always quite high. So we'll be watching that very closely, because back in 2017, the last time when we had an Assembly election, turnout was incredibly high. So we'll be watching to see if there's any difference in that turnout at the close of polls tomorrow. Counting in Northern Ireland doesn't start, of course, until Friday morning, and we're probably expecting the first results in early afternoon.
In saying that, it is looking like Sinn Féin, I think they've been ahead in every poll now to be the largest party. What consequences is that going to have, Arlene? Are we now looking at the fact that the executive may not get up and running at all?
Well, I have always said that I don't think the executive will immediately come back, Darren, not because of who wins the election, but rather because of the fact that, as you will recall, the DUP pulled their First Minister out of office at the beginning of February as a result of inaction over the protocol. That hasn't gone away, so I don't think you will see an executive being formed immediately after the election, regardless of who so-called wins the election, because I do think it's important that our viewers and listeners understand that Northern Ireland devolution is completely different from Scotland and Wales. Here in Northern Ireland, we have a mandatory coalition, and actually, so over this past number of years, the top 5 parties have been in the executive. That's like the cabinet in Westminster. So we have had members of the executive from the SDLP, the Alliance Party, the Ulster Unionist Party, as well as Sinn Féin and the DUP.
And just very finally and quickly, Arlene, because we've got about 30 seconds left. In the end, do you think the protocol is going to get sorted out after this election, or do you think the UK government's going to continue dragging its feet?
We'll be watching very closely what the Queen's speech says next Tuesday, Darren, and I'm sure you and I will be talking about that again when we see the text of that Queen's speech. But I expect that there will be something in the Queen's speech to deal with the protocol and its shortcomings.
OK, Arlene, as always, thank you very much. And we'll be, of course, in Northern Ireland broadcasting throughout the weekend with the results here on GB News. Thank you, Arlene Foster there, joined us from Northern Ireland. OK, well, that is it. A busy programme today, live from Sunderland here on GB News. I'll be back in London tomorrow. Don't forget, we'll have the full results from all these elections throughout Friday here on GB News. Up next, it is Colin Brazier between 4 and 6. But before that, and I say the weather's been pretty changeable in the northeast of England today. Rain, sun, heat and cold. Here's the weather from the Met Office. I'll see you back in the studio tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Things are warming up, certainly tomorrow, where it's sunny, feeling quite a bit warmer than recent days, and most will have a dry day. There's always 1 or 2 exceptions. Certainly far from dry out there this afternoon. These weather fronts have been bringing some fairly heavy showers. Behind that, high pressure is trying to build in, but these weather fronts will also be toppling into the far northwest. Before that, though, we've still got some pretty lively showers over parts of eastern England. Quite a lot of spray and surface water on the roads as those showers steadily fade away through the evening, so most places becoming dry. But that next set of weather fronts will bring some patchy rain to the Highlands, the Western Isles and the Northern Isles through the night. For most, though, it's dry. We'll have some clear spells developing, and temperatures certainly across England and Wales dropping well down into single figures. A coolish start to Thursday, but by and large it's going to be a fine day. By the afternoon, feeling warmer than today as well. The main exception will be the Highlands, the Western Isles, where we see cloud and rain on and off for much of the day. 1 or 2 showers perhaps elsewhere across Scotland, but for certainly most of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, dry and bright, and where we see some sunshine, back up to 20, maybe 21 Celsius. Obviously, it'll be cooler with that rain in the far northwest, which keeps going through Thursday evening. Elsewhere, maybe the odd shower during the evening, but for most, it'll be dry and clear. That rain in the northwest starts to pep up and get more organised into a line. That's a weather front which will be pushing southwards to change things up a bit on Friday. Certainly more cloud across northern England with some rain for a time, and Northern Ireland, slipping southwards across England and Wales during the day. A few showers to the south, brighter skies to the northwest with a slightly fresher feel. But again, temperatures mostly in the mid to high teens. And that's where we'll be into the weekend. Those weather fronts slipping south on Friday, but clearing out of the way, high pressure building in, which will bring most of us a fine weekend, dry and bright for most on Saturday and Sunday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is